This week we got to look at the Assembly and Senate budget bills, which are actually fairly close to the governor's spending plan. However, there are a few key differences, and these are sure to spark some fairly heated battles in the coming weeks. One key change by the Assembly Democrats, a removal of the medical malpractice payment cap proposed by the governor's Medicaid Redesign task force. My next guest opposed that plan. Donna Montalto is the executive director of the New York chapter of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Thank you very much for your time.
Sure.
When I say that you opposed it, actually, this is new for you, right? This is not a position that you initially held. So what was it that helped get you to this place?
So we are supporting the governor's proposal now, and we just came out actually yesterday with a full-blown, analysis of the proposal. The reason we're going forward is because the cap is very important to us, and we recognize that the rates for OBGYNs have been escalating for 25 years, and we need to do something to keep OBGYNs in practice. And so the cap is really the only thing that's going to do that. Back in 1991, ACOG proposed a NoFault compensation program for neurologically impaired infants. Those are kids who were born with cerebral palsy. And we pushed very hard during the MRT, the Medicaid Redesign Team plan, to have that NoFault proposal included in the governor's proposal.
I just have to, I can't help, I'm sort of smiling a little bit. Yeah. I can't help but no, we're talking about, first of all, it's like deja vu all over again. MRT, right, Medicaid Redesign, and the governor was Mario Cuomo,
That's
right?
correct.
So we're talking about an issue that is so intractable and really emotional for people, and also we're talking about a lot of money. So it's been since 1991 that you've been working on this particular issue.
It has been, and Mario Cuomo was the champion of our proposal initially. And again, that's a proposal to help kids who are born with things like cerebral palsy. There's no known cause for that kind of neurologic development. In most cases, in over 90% of the cases, it could be something that happens prenatally, it could happen during delivery or in the postpartum period. And so as a result, we've been pushing for really systematic changes to the tort system so that when a child is born with neurologic impairment, we set up a program for them so they have a lifetime of care, a lifetime of expenses paid for, just everything that the family could possibly need.
Well, the problem here is that, as I said, it's so emotional that the people on the other side who say, if you cap these payouts, then when there is, not necessarily in a case of CP, but even an accident, a mistake by a doctor, and a child is enormously hurt and spends the rest of his or her life essentially needing a very expensive care, if you cap at $250,000, then people are not going to be able to afford to take care of their children for the duration of their lives.
Yeah. I think it's important for the public to understand that we're not capping the medical component of those expenses, that when a child is born with a brain damage of some sort, you want to go to the mat to get as much medical care for that child, as much respite care for the family. You want to make sure that the lost wages for that child are compensated by a court if you go through a court system. You want to make sure that a kid, let's say again born with cerebral palsy, who needs a wheelchair because he's going through puberty, let's say, and Medicaid might not be paying for it, that award is actually going to pay for that medical care. And we're not capping any of those expenses. Those are all still covered.
Right. So what we're talking about here is non-economic damages.
That's right.
That's what the cap is. Could you explain what that means?
Sure. So non-economic damages is something it's hard to really put a number on, but it's really pain and suffering. So it's the pain and suffering that the family might have to go through during the life of dealing with a child who's born with these unfortunate circumstances. It's very hard to put a number on that, though. And sometimes when you have a lay jury, a jury of our peers looking at a case, they want to say, oh, that poor family, gosh, we need to do something, so let's give them a large pain and suffering award. And so what we're saying is, we can't really look at the pain and suffering. We have to look at what the child needs. Child needs medical care, the child needs, recompensation for their lost wages, then that's what we need to pay for, but not the pain and suffering.
Does a medical indemnity fund for neurologically impaired infants, that is the other piece of this. So one is the cap on the what we're just talking here, on the non-economic payments, and the other is this fund. Does that mean that a person would have to apply to that fund every time that they needed money?
The way the program would work is once you go through a lawsuit, and the lawsuit is either settled or you go through court, then the medical care, the expenses for that child would be paid for by this medical indemnity fund. And every year the family would get an allotment, whatever they needed from this fund. very easy to access those funds, and it's not a complicated system the way our program works currently.
You know, the problem here is that critics have also said, other than that victims, it's unfair to victims because it caps their whatever they might be able to receive, and it's hard to put a cost on whatever suffering you might have. That they also argue that this is beneficial to hospitals because hospitals, of course, are just dealing with these spiraling, out of control insurance rates. And this was the way that the hospitals would agree to sign on to the MRT, which also caps them and cuts them, essentially. So
Right.
in the end of a result, their cuts are going to be made up by the fact that they actually are going to pay less in insurance over time.
That's exactly right. There's a quid pro quo in there. So the hospitals are taking a tremendous cut in Medicaid. So the quid pro quo is if they accept those Medicaid cuts, then they want something on the other side. And what they want is a reduction in their medical liability premiums that the hospitals pay. And so this medical indemnity fund would reduce their actual payouts, what they need to pay out for cases of neurologic impairment. But I want to be clear, the cap actually helps hospitals more than does the medical indemnity fund. And the cap helps physicians more, helps obstetricians stay in practice. You know, we have 8 counties in New York State right now where there are no practicing obstetricians. We have 32 counties in New York that have less than 5 obstetricians. And so as you were talking about before, you know, we've been in this game since 1991. We've gotten to a crisis point here. We have potentially 12,000 deliveries in the Bronx that may not be covered.
Right.
I mean, we're at a point now where something has to be done. So the cap definitely is going to help, and the indemnity fund is definitely going to help, but the cap helps both hospitals.
But I guess what it sets up for is this argument, which is really unfortunate. Is it a fair trade-off, right? Because hospitals don't have a face the way a mother with a child who is suffering has a face, right? And the child has a face. And so to say this helps hospitals and their bottom line, so we can keep hospitals open, which people want, so we can keep doctors who deliver babies employed, which is what people want. I mean, you showed me the practice rates are astronomical if you are in fact being able to do a C-section. If you don't want to do a C-section, your rates go down enormously. But that trade-off is very difficult to sell.
Yeah. I think families have to recognize, too, that very few people go through the court system. And in the area of obstetrics, which is getting a lot of focus right now, the big awards that go through are for things that really are not caused during the labor itself, things like birth asphyxia, where the child might have been without oxygen for a period of time. Those are very, very small number of cases compared to all cases that go through the court system and compared to people who don't even go through the court system. And so I think families and the public need to understand that the savings that can be generated from this program can be brought back into the community for things like obesity education. You know, if you save physicians and hospitals tremendous amounts of dollars in medical liability that, you know, goes to so few families, so few, that the ultimate savings for everybody is an investment in their health care by lowering premiums, by increasing education in obesity and exercise, nutrition, things like that. So it has to be looked at in a big picture.
Yeah, it's a very difficult issue, and unfortunately we're out of time, but of course there's also the piece of the lawyers who have an interest in this because they get paid, obviously, out of their cases. So, and we've heard from some of them. I want to thank you very much for helping us break this down. It is tricky. Thank you very much, Donna Montalto. I appreciate it.
Thank you.